"No, don't board the plane," cried the beggar. When the billionaire learned why he was shocked, "Before we continue, please comment on which city you are watching from." The bitter Chicago wind cut through the February air like a blade, swirling snow around the private airfield, where Rashid Al-Hakim's Gulfstream G650 sat waiting. At 38, the Arab billionaire had built an empire spanning 3 continents, transforming oil wealth into technological innovation that revolutionized sustainable energy. Today marked the pinnacle of his achievements, a $12 billion partnership with American corporations that would bring clean energy to millions. Rashid adjusted his tailored overcoat, watching his security team conduct final checks. Journalists from major networks had gathered, their cameras capturing every moment of what they called the deal of the century. His assistant briefed him on the New York itinerary, while bodyguards maintained their protective perimeter. The scene should have felt triumphant. Instead, something gnawed at him, an inexplicable unease that contradicted years of meticulous planning. Perhaps it was the harsh Midwestern winter, so different from his native Kuwait, or the pressure of a deal that would reshape global energy markets. As he approached the aircraft steps, acknowledging the crowd with a confident wave, Rashid embodied everything the American dream promised: immigrant success, innovation, and unlimited possibility. His story had graced magazine covers worldwide, the refugee child who became a technological visionary, but in the shadows of the industrial landscape, beyond the glare of media lights and the warmth of corporate privilege, a different America existed. One where children learned survival before they learned to read, where hope was a luxury few could afford, and where voices went unheard in the rush toward progress. Neither Rashid nor the assembled crowd noticed the small figure moving through the darkness toward them, driven by something more powerful than fear or cold, a desperate need to prevent a catastrophe that only she could see coming. The wind carried her whispered prayers as she prepared to change everything. Grace Martinez had learned to be invisible. At 8 years old, she possessed a survival instinct that most adults never developed, moving through Chicago's underground tunnels like a ghost. The abandoned subway system beneath the South Side had become her sanctuary after child services failed her for the 3rd time, placing her with families who saw her only as a monthly check. She had been living in the tunnels for 6 months now, ever since escaping from the Johnson foster home where Mr. Johnson's hands wandered at night, and Mrs. Johnson pretended not to notice. Grace had tried telling caseworkers before, but they always chose to believe the adults, so she chose herself instead, disappearing into the labyrinth beneath the city where nobody asked questions and nobody hurt her. The tunnels had their own ecosystem. There was Miguel, a veteran who lost his legs in Afghanistan and now protected the tunnel children with fierce loyalty. There was Dorothy, an elderly woman whose mental illness had cost her everything but whose heart remained pure gold. And there were others, society's forgotten, America's invisible, people who had fallen through every safety net. Grace had always been different. Even before the streets claimed her, she saw things others couldn't see, knew things she shouldn't know. Her grandmother had called it the gift before cancer took her away, leaving Grace alone in a system that processed children like inventory. That February morning, something had awakened her in the pre-dawn darkness. Not a sound or movement, but a feeling like electricity racing through her small body. Images flashed through her mind, metal twisted in flames, bodies scattered like broken dolls, a man in an expensive coat who didn't deserve to die. The visions came in fragments, always had. Sometimes she saw car accidents before they happened. Sometimes she knew when police raids were coming to clear the tunnels, but this was different, more intense, more urgent. Someone was going to die today unless she acted. Following her instincts through the maze of maintenance corridors, Grace emerged near the private airfield, just as black SUVs began arriving. She recognized him immediately from her vision, the man in the tailored coat, surrounded by people who moved with purpose and power. Rashid Al-Hakim represented everything Grace had never known: security, privilege, a world where children didn't go hungry or hide from predators, yet somehow their fates had become intertwined. She didn't understand why the universe had chosen her to save him, only that she must. Hidden behind a maintenance shed, Grace watched the preparations unfold. Security personnel swept the area with practiced efficiency while journalists set up their equipment. The airplane gleamed in the morning light, beautiful and deadly. Her bare feet had gone numb in the snow, but she barely noticed. Everything in her 8-year-old existence, every lesson in survival, every moment of pain that had forged her strength, had led to this moment. She had to find the courage to cross the invisible line between the forgotten and the powerful, to make them listen to a voice society had taught them to ignore. The engines began to warm up, and Grace knew her time was running out. Taking a deep breath that clouded in the frigid air, she stepped out from the shadows and began to run. Rashid had built his fortune by trusting his instincts, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. As he climbed the steps to his Gulf Stream, a child's voice pierced through the winter air with desperate urgency. "No, don't board the plane!" He turned to see a small girl racing across the tarmac, her bare feet leaving bloody prints in the snow. She couldn't have been older than 8, with tangled blonde hair and clothes that hung like rags on her thin frame. Security immediately moved to intercept her, but something in her eyes, wild terror mixed with supernatural certainty, made Rashid raise his hand to stop them. "Sir, we need to maintain the schedule," his head of security, Marcus Webb, urged. "The weather window is closing, and the New York team is waiting." But Rashid found himself stepping back down, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion. The girl wasn't running toward him with the calculated desperation of someone seeking money or attention. This was primal fear, the kind that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to survival instincts. "Please," Grace gasped, reaching him despite the guards' attempts to restrain her. "You can't get on that plane. I saw it. I saw the fire, the pieces falling into the water. Please believe me." The media crews were capturing everything, their cameras rolling as one of the world's most powerful men stood transfixed by a homeless child's warning. Rashid's business partners exchanged concerned glances. Shareholders would question any delay, especially one caused by what appeared to be a disturbed street child. "Sweetheart," Rashid said gently, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "What's your name?" "Grace," she whispered, her small body trembling not just from cold, but from the intensity of whatever vision had driven her here. "I know you don't know me, and I know how this looks, but something terrible will happen if you get on that plane." Rashid studied her face, searching for signs of deception or mental illness. Instead, he found a clarity that unnerved him, the same intuitive certainty he'd learned to trust in business dealings. This child wasn't lying or delusional. She believed absolutely in what she was telling him. "Sir," his pilot's voice crackled through the radio, "we need to take off within the next 10 minutes to maintain our flight plan." The logical choice was clear. Billions of dollars rode on this deal, hundreds of jobs depended on its success, and his reputation as a decisive leader was at stake. Delayed by a child's fears would make him appear weak, superstitious, unfit to lead multinational corporations. Yet as Rashid looked into Grace's eyes, he saw something that reminded him of his own childhood, the refugee camps where his family had lived, where survival meant listening to warnings others might dismiss. His mother had possessed similar intuition, an ability to sense danger that had kept their family alive through war and displacement. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he said quietly, ignoring the growing agitation of his entourage. Grace closed her eyes, the images flooding back with painful clarity. "So the plane lifts off normally, but something goes wrong over the lake. There's an explosion, not from the outside, but from within, pieces of metal spinning through the air, and then," she opened her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Everyone dies, but it doesn't have to happen. You can choose differently." Rashid felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Chicago winter. The decision came to Rashid like a lightning strike, sudden, inexplicable, but absolute. Against every rational instinct built from decades of calculated risks and measured outcomes, he found himself stepping away from the aircraft. "Cancel the flight," he announced, his voice carrying across the tarmac with quiet authority. The reaction was immediate and explosive. His business partner, Jonathan Sterling, a silver-haired titan of American industry, stepped forward with barely contained fury. "Rashid, what the hell are you doing? We have the Defense Department waiting, Congress breathing down our necks, and stockholders who'll crucify us if this deal falls through." "Sir," Marcus Webb pressed, "we've run every security protocol 3 times. The aircraft has been thoroughly inspected. There's no credible threat." "The threat," Rashid interrupted, never taking his eyes off Grace, "is standing right here, and she's 8 years old." The media erupted into a frenzy. Cameras zoomed in as reporters began speculating wildly about security breaches, terrorist threats, or a billionaire's mental breakdown. Social media would explode within minutes. Billionaire believes would trend worldwide before the sun set. Grace stood trembling in the center of the chaos she'd unleashed, suddenly aware of how small she was in this world of titans. Security guards surrounded her, unsure whether she was a hero or a threat. The rich man who'd listened to her warning now faced the consequence of believing someone society had taught him to ignore. "You're making the biggest mistake of your career," Sterling warned. "The Pentagon won't reschedule for a child's nightmare." This deal took 3 years to negotiate. His words were cut short by a sound that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. The Gulf Stream, now airborne with only the flight crew aboard, had reached approximately 8,000 feet when a catastrophic explosion tore through its fuselage. The aircraft split apart like a broken toy, pieces of metal and debris creating a deadly constellation against the gray February sky before plummeting into the icy waters of Lake Michigan. Silence fell over the tarmac like a funeral shroud. The only sounds were the distant wail of emergency sirens and Grace's quiet sobbing as she collapsed to her knees in the snow. Rashid stared at the horizon where his aircraft, where he should have been, had become a graveyard in the sky. His hands shook as the magnitude of what had just transpired settled over him. 3 crew members had died, but it should have been 27 souls lost, including his own. Jonathan Sterling's face had gone ashen, his earlier fury replaced by something approaching terror. "How?" he whispered. How did she know? But Rashid wasn't looking at Sterling, or the burning wreckage being pulled from the lake by Coast Guard vessels. He was looking at Grace, this broken, forgotten child who had somehow reached across the vast chasm between their worlds to save his life. Kneeling beside her in the blood-stained snow, he gently placed his overcoat around her tiny shoulders. For the first time since arriving in Chicago, Rashid truly saw his surroundings, not just the clean lines of corporate architecture and the comfort of wealth, but the abandoned buildings beyond the fence, the homeless encampments hidden from media view, the America that existed in the shadows of his success. "Grace," he said softly, "where are your parents?" She looked up at him with eyes that held far too much knowledge for someone so young. "Dead," she whispered. "Car accident 2 years ago. Foster care didn't work out." She paused, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I live in the tunnels now." The words hit him like physical blows. While he'd been building his empire, children like Grace had been falling through society's cracks, becoming invisible to everyone except each other. She'd saved his life, but who was saving hers? "The tunnels?" Rashid asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Underground," Grace explained matter-of-factly. "Old subway system. Lots of us down there, people nobody wants to see." She looked around at the chaos of emergency vehicles and media crews. "I should go before they try to send me back to foster care." But as Grace started to stand, Rashid gently caught her arm. "Wait," he said, his mind racing through possibilities he'd never before considered. "You saved my life today. The least I can do is make sure you're safe." Grace studied his face with the wariness of someone who'd learned that adult promises usually turn to lies. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "People like me don't get saved. We just survive until we can't anymore." The brutal honesty of her words shattered something inside Rashid's chest, some carefully constructed wall between his success and the suffering that surrounded it. He'd donated millions to charity, attended fundraisers, written checks to causes that looked good in annual reports. But he'd never truly seen the faces behind the statistics, never understood that salvation required more than money. It demanded presence, commitment, the willingness to bridge worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. As emergency crews worked to recover the wreckage, and investigators began asking questions about how a child had predicted aviation disaster, Rashid made a decision that would change not just his life, but challenge everything American society believed about worth, value, and whose voices deserved to be heard. The Chicago Police Department's interview room felt like a cage. Grace sat in a chair designed for adults, her feet barely touching the floor, while Detective Sarah Chen asked questions with practiced patience. Rashid had insisted on staying, despite legal advisors warning him about liability and association with a minor outside proper channels. "Grace, we need to understand how you knew about the plane," Detective Chen said gently. "Did someone tell you something? Did you overhear a conversation?" Grace's eyes darted to Rashid, seeking some sign of whether she should tell the truth. The billionaire nodded encouragingly. though he wasn't sure he was ready for whatever that truth might contain. "I see things sometimes," Grace whispered, "things that haven't happened yet but will. My grandmother called it the gift, but it feels more like a curse." Detective Chen exchanged glances with the FBI agent who'd joined them, Special Agent Rodriguez, whose expression suggested he dealt in facts, not fairy tales. "Grace, what you're describing is impossible," Grace finished. "I know how it sounds. That's why I don't tell anyone anymore. That's why I live in the tunnels." Rashid leaned forward. "Tell me about the tunnels, Grace. Tell me about the people there." What emerged over the next hour was a revelation that shook Rashid to his core. Grace described an entire underground civilization, hundreds of people living in Chicago's abandoned transit system, creating their own society in the spaces America had forgotten. Children who'd aged out of foster care, veterans struggling with PTSD, elderly people whose families had disappeared, immigrants without documentation, mentally ill individuals abandoned by a healthcare system that treated symptoms but never causes. "Miguel runs everything," Grace explained. "He keeps us safe. Makes sure the little kids eat first. Dorothy teaches reading to anyone who wants to learn. There's this man named Vincent who fixes things. Heaters, radios, anything mechanical. And Rosa. She was a nurse before life got too hard." "How many children are down there?" Agent Rodriguez asked, his tone shifting from skepticism to concern. "Maybe 30, Grace said. "Some as young as 5. Marcus is only 4. His mom died of an overdose, and he doesn't talk anymore, just follows me around." The numbers were staggering, but what haunted Rashid was the casual way Grace discussed survival at an age when children should be worried about homework and playground games. She described finding food in restaurant dumpsters, sharing blankets during winter storms, and the constant fear of police raids that scattered their community like startled birds. "The visions," Detective Chen prompted. "When did they start?" Grace's face clouded. "After my parents died. First it was small things, knowing when Mrs. Patterson next door would fall down her stairs, seeing that the school bus would break down before it happened. But nobody believed me, so I learned to stay quiet." "What about the plane?" Rashid asked. "Was that vision different?" Grace nodded. "Stronger, more detailed. I woke up at 4 in the morning with my whole body shaking. I saw your face clearly, not just the explosion, but you specifically. I knew I had to find you." She paused, studying Rashid with those 2 old eyes. "The weird thing is, I also saw what comes after. If you listen, really listen, things could change, not just for me, but for all of us underground." Agent Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Mr. Al-Hakim, Child Services will need to place Grace in protective custody while we investigate the crash and determine—" "No," Grace said sharply, fear replacing the calm in her voice. "Please, no foster homes. I won't go back to that." Rashid watched panic flood across her features and realized he was witnessing the system that had already failed her preparing to fail her again. The same institutions that had processed her like inventory would now process her like evidence, moving her through bureaucratic channels without ever seeing her as a human being. "Detective Chen," Rashid said carefully, "what would it take for Grace to remain in my custody while this investigation proceeds?" The room fell silent. His lawyer, Margaret Walsh, who'd been quietly taking notes, looked up sharply. "Rashid, that's not how—" "I saved his life," Grace said quietly. "Doesn't that count for something?" The simple truth of it hung in the air. This 8-year-old girl had prevented a catastrophe that would have dominated headlines worldwide, had sacrificed her anonymity and safety to save someone she'd never met, and now the system wanted to disappear her back into institutions that had already proven they couldn't protect her. "There are procedures," Agent Rodriguez began. "Then change them," Rashid said with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to reshaping rules. "This child has information that may be crucial to your investigation. More importantly, she's a human being who deserves better than the system that's already abandoned her once." He turned to Grace, seeing not just the girl who'd saved his life, but a representative of countless others living invisible lives in America's shadows. "Grace, would you be willing to help me understand? To show me this world beneath the city that I never knew existed?" Grace studied his face, searching for deception or hidden motives. "Why?" she asked simply. "You could go back to your life. Pretend this never happened. Rich people do that all the time." Rashid thought of his mother. who died in a refugee camp, believing her son might someday have the power to help others escape the hopelessness that had claimed her. "Because," he said quietly, "I think maybe I've been living the wrong life, and maybe you're here to help me understand what the right one looks like." For the first time since the plane had exploded, Grace smiled. The descent into Chicago's underground began at midnight, when the city above surrendered its streets to winter wind and scattered snowflakes. Rashid had traded his tailored suit for jeans and a heavy jacket, though he still looked impossibly out of place, as Grace led him through a concealed entrance behind an abandoned warehouse on the south side. "Stay close," Grace whispered, producing a small flashlight from her jacket. "The tunnels are like a maze until you learn them. People get lost down here, and sometimes we don't find them for weeks." The air grew warmer as they descended, heated by steam pipes and the collective body warmth of hundreds of people. Graffiti covered the walls, some of it art, some of it territorial markings, some of it simply the desperate need to prove existence in a world determined to ignore them. "Miguel doesn't trust outsiders," Grace warned, as they navigated deeper into the labyrinth, especially rich ones. "He says money changes people, makes them think they can buy solutions to problems they don't understand." They passed through several chambers, each one revealing more of this hidden civilization. In one area, families had created living spaces using tarps and salvaged furniture, transforming subway alcoves into homes. Children played quietly in corners, while adults gathered around small fires, sharing food and stories with the careful generosity of people who understood scarcity. "That's Dorothy." Grace pointed to an elderly African-American woman reading aloud from a tattered book to a circle of children. She was a teacher for 30 years before her pension disappeared and her apartment became too expensive. Now she runs our school." Dorothy looked up as they passed, her eyes immediately fixing on Rashid with suspicion. "Grace, child, who's this you've brought among us?" "The man from the plane," Grace said simply. "The one I saved." Word spread through the tunnels with remarkable speed. By the time they reached the main gathering area, dozens of people had emerged from the shadows to study this billionaire who'd descended into their world. Rashid felt their gazes like physical weight, some curious, some hostile, all wary. Miguel appeared from a side passage, and Rashid understood immediately why Grace had spoken of him with such respect. The veteran moved with purpose despite his prosthetic legs, his weathered face carrying the authority of someone who'd learned leadership through combat and loss. "So you're the rich man our girl saved," Miguel said, his tone carefully neutral. "Question is, what brings you down here? Guilt? Curiosity? Some documentary you're planning?" "Honestly," Rashid said, meeting Miguel's direct stare, "I don't know yet, but I know that Grace showed me something today I'd never seen before, that there's an entire America I've been blind to." "Blind?" repeated a woman's voice from the crowd. Rosa emerged from the shadows, her nurse's training evident in the way she moved to check on Grace, examining the girl's feet with professional concern. "You want to know about blind? Try watching children go hungry while billionaires debate tax breaks. Try seeing veterans freeze to death outside buildings owned by people who never served anything but their own interests." The accusation hung heavy in the recycled air. Rashid felt the weight of their collective judgment, not just of him personally, but of everything he represented. "You're right," he said quietly. "I've lived in a bubble, made money while people suffered, convinced myself that charitable donations absolved me of responsibility for the system that created both my wealth and your poverty." "Pretty words," Miguel said, "but we've heard pretty words before. Politicians come down here during election years, promise change, then disappear back to their comfortable lives. What makes you different?" Before Rashid could answer, a commotion erupted from one of the side tunnels. A young man burst into the gathering space, his face flushed with panic. "Miguel! Police are coming. 3 entrances, maybe more. Someone tipped them about the airplane thing." The community moved with practiced efficiency, born of too much experience with raids. Children were gathered quickly, belongings packed into bags that could be grabbed at a moment's notice. But Rashid noticed something that stopped him cold. Despite their fear, despite the urgency, the strongest adults stayed close to the weakest, ensuring no one would be left behind. "There's a safe house in Pilsen," Miguel announced. "Rosa, take the children. Vincent, kill the fires. Everyone else, you know the drill." But Grace wasn't moving. She stood in the center of the chaos, her small face set with determination. "This is because of me," she said. "Because I went above ground, because I saved him." She looked at Rashid. "They'll keep coming now. They'll break us apart because I couldn't stay invisible." The guilt in her voice shattered something inside Rashid. This child, who'd saved his life at tremendous personal cost, was watching her entire world collapse because she'd chosen to trust him with her secret. "No," he said firmly, stepping forward. "This ends now." Miguel wheeled around. "What are you talking about? You need to leave. If they find you here, it'll be worse for everyone." "I'm not leaving," Rashid said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "And neither are you. Any of you." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found the number he needed. "Detective Chen? It's Rashid Al-Hakim. I understand there's a police action beginning at the tunnel location. I'm here as a witness to these people's circumstances, and I'm requesting that any enforcement action be postponed until proper social services can be arranged." The conversation that followed was tense but brief. When Rashid hung up, the tunnels had fallen silent except for the distant sound of footsteps echoing through passages above. "They'll give us until morning," he announced. 12 hours to figure out something better than scattering people who've done nothing wrong except exist in a society that's failed them." Miguel studied him with new interest. "And what exactly do you think you can do in 12 hours that we haven't been trying to do for years?" Rashid looked around at the faces watching him. Children who should be in school, veterans who'd served their country only to be abandoned by it, elderly people who'd worked their entire lives only to find their golden years tarnished by poverty and neglect. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I can't walk away from this. Grace didn't just save my life. She opened my eyes to a problem that money alone can't solve, but that money plus commitment might begin to address." Grace moved to stand beside him, her small hand slipping into his larger one. "The vision," she said softly. "I told you I saw what comes after. This is it. The moment everything changes if you choose to stay." And standing in that underground chamber, surrounded by America's forgotten people, Rashid Al-Hakim made the second life-altering decision of his life in less than 24 hours. Dawn broke over Chicago with a crystalline clarity that seemed to mock the complexity of the situation unfolding beneath the city. Rashid had spent the night in the tunnels, sleeping on a makeshift cot beside Grace, listening to the sounds of a community that never truly slept, whispered conversations, children crying softly in their sleep, the constant vigilance of people who'd learned that safety was always temporary. He woke to find Grace already up, sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor with Marcus, the 4-year-old boy she'd mentioned, who hadn't spoken since his mother's death. The child was drawing with broken crayons on scraps of cardboard, creating pictures that spoke of trauma no child should carry. "He draws the same thing every day," Grace explained quietly. "His mom lying still, and himself calling for help that never comes." Rashid studied the crude but heartbreaking artwork, seeing in it a reflection of every child in these tunnels, artistic expressions of abandonment, fear, and a resilience that shouldn't be necessary at such young ages. "Has he had any counseling? Any professional help?" Grace's laugh held no humor. "Professional help costs money. Even if someone wanted to help, the system would separate him from the only family he has left, us. So we take care of each other instead." As the morning progressed, Rashid began to understand the intricate social structure Miguel had built in this underground world. There were work assignments based on ability. Rosa provided medical care using supplies scavenged from hospital dumpsters. Vincent maintained heating systems and electrical connections that kept them warm. Dorothy ran educational programs with books rescued from library discards. But it was more than survival. It was a functioning micro-society built on principles that shamed the world above. No one went hungry while others had food. Children were protected by every adult. The elderly were respected for their wisdom rather than discarded for their frailty. Mental illness was treated with patience and support rather than criminalization. "You've created something remarkable down here," Rashid told Miguel as they walked through the main living area. "A community that actually takes care of its people." Miguel's expression remained skeptical. "We've created what we had to create to survive. But survival isn't living. And kids like Grace deserve better than hiding in tunnels, because society doesn't want to see them." "What would better look like?" Rashid asked. "Real homes," Miguel said immediately. "Not shelters that split up families or institutions that process people like cattle. Homes where children can be children, where veterans can heal, where elderly people can live with dignity." He paused, his weathered hands gripping his wheelchair arms. "A mental health care that actually helps instead of just medicating symptoms. Job training for people who want to work but can't break through the barriers that homelessness creates. And, most importantly, recognition that we're human beings, not problems to be solved or swept under the rug." The conversation was interrupted by Rosa's urgent voice, calling from across the chamber. "Miguel? Grace? You need to see this." They gathered around Vincent's small radio, where a news report was describing the plane crash investigation. Sources confirmed that the aircraft experienced catastrophic engine failure due to a manufacturing defect that went undetected during routine inspections. The same model aircraft have been grounded worldwide pending investigation. Grace's face went pale. "It wasn't supposed to be mechanical failure," she whispered. "In my vision, it was something else, something deliberate." Rashid felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground cold. "What did you see exactly? Tell me every detail." Grace closed her eyes, the images flooding back with uncomfortable clarity. Someone had tampered with something, not the engine, but something in the cabin, a device hidden where no one would look. The explosion came from inside, then spread to the fuel system. "Are you saying someone tried to assassinate you?" Rosa asked Rashid directly. The implications were staggering. Rashid's business dealings had made him enemies. Oil companies threatened by his renewable energy innovations, political figures opposed to Middle Eastern investment in American infrastructure, even extremist groups who saw his success as a betrayal of traditional power structures. "Grace," he said carefully, "in your vision, did you see who placed the device?" She shook her head. "Just hands in expensive gloves, moving quickly, ma." "But," she hesitated, her young face troubled. "There was something else. After the explosion, I saw men in suits talking about how convenient it was, how it would stop the deal and send a message to other foreign investors." Miguel's military training kicked in immediately. If Grace is right, then bringing the police down here wasn't about finding her. It was about isolating her, making sure her testimony couldn't be verified or believed. Who's going to take the word of a homeless child against powerful people? The realization hit Rashid like a physical blow. By bringing attention to Grace, by involving her in the investigation, he'd potentially put her in greater danger than she'd ever faced living underground. The very people who might have tried to kill him would now see her as a threat to be eliminated. "We need to get her somewhere safe," he said immediately. "She is safe," Miguel replied firmly. "Safer here than she'd be in any government facility where they could reach her easily." But Grace was shaking her head. "The vision is changing," she said, her voice distant and frightened. "When I concentrate on what comes next, it's not the same anymore. Someone knows I exist now, knows what I can do. They're coming, not police, but others." As if summoned by her words, Vincent burst into the chamber from his watchpost near the main entrance. "Black SUVs," he reported tersely. "Government plates, but not local. And they're not announcing themselves like police would." The underground community sprang into action with military precision, but Rashid realized with growing horror that there was nowhere to run. These tunnels, which had provided sanctuary for hundreds of forgotten Americans, were about to become a trap. "There's another way," Grace said suddenly, her eyes bright with the strange clarity that came with her visions. "But it means trusting me completely, even when what I ask doesn't make sense." Rashid knelt beside her, meeting her gaze directly. "Tell me." "We don't run," Grace said with startling calm. "We go deeper, to the old part of the tunnels, where the water main broke last year and flooded everything. They won't follow us there because they'll think it's impassable." "Grace," Miguel protested, "that section is dangerous. The water's still knee-deep, and the supports are damaged." "I know," she said simply, "but it's also where we'll find the proof of who really tried to kill Mr. Al-Hakim. Because sometimes the only way to stop running is to turn around and face what's chasing you." As footsteps echoed through the upper tunnels and flashlight beams began probing the darkness, Grace took Rashid's hand and led him toward what she promised would be either salvation or disaster. In the distance, Marcus finally spoke his first words in months. "Don't leave me," and Rosa, scooping up the little boy, whispered fiercely, "Never. We never leave our family behind." The flooded tunnels were a nightmare of rust-stained water and crumbling concrete. Grace led them through passages that seemed to defy logic, her small form moving with the confidence of someone who'd mapped every inch of this underground world. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, as their hunters apparently decided the flooded section was indeed impassable. "How much further?" Rosa whispered, Marcus clinging to her back as she waded through water that reached her thighs. "Almost there," Grace replied, though Rashid noticed the strain in her voice. The girl was exhausted, running on pure determination and whatever supernatural instinct guided her visions. They emerged into a circular chamber that had once been a subway junction. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls, revealing a space that seemed frozen in time. Old advertisements for products that no longer existed, route maps for trains that no longer ran, benches where commuters had once waited for transportation that now served only as refuge for societies forgotten. "Here," Grace said, pointing to a maintenance panel near what had once been the ticket booth. "Vincent, can you open that?" The veteran examined the panel with professional interest. "It's been welded shut, but..." He produced tools from his ever-present kit and began working. "What exactly are we looking for?" "The truth," Grace said cryptically, "about who really wanted Mr. Al-Hakim dead and why." As Vincent worked, Miguel positioned himself at the chamber entrance, listening for pursuit. Dorothy gathered the children around her, keeping them calm with whispered stories. Rosa continued her quiet assessment of everyone's health, her medical training never switching off even in crisis. Rashid watched this displaced community function with the efficiency that would impress corporate boardrooms, each person contributing their unique skills to collective survival. "How long have you all been together?" he asked Miguel. "Most of us found each other over the past 2 years," the veteran replied without taking his eyes off the tunnel entrance. "Started with just me and Dorothy, then others began joining. Grace came to us 6 months ago, but she was already a leader even at 8 years old." "Got it," Vincent announced as the panel swung open, revealing a space packed with electronic equipment. "Someone's been using this as a surveillance post. This gear is expensive, government or corporate grade." Grace moved to the equipment with unsettling familiarity. "I saw this in my vision. Someone watching, waiting for the right moment." She pointed to multiple monitors, showing feeds from cameras throughout the tunnel system. "They've been tracking all of us for weeks." Rashid felt his blood run cold as he studied the setup. This wasn't random surveillance. It was a comprehensive operation designed to monitor an entire underground community. "Vincent, can you trace where these signals are going?" "Already on it," Vincent replied, his fingers dancing over equipment that suggested his mechanical skills extended to electronics. "The feeds are being transmitted to..." Jesus. "This is going to multiple locations. FBI, Homeland Security, but also..." He paused, his face grim. "Private contractors, military surveillance companies. Why would they be watching homeless people?" Dorothy asked, her teacher's instinct for getting to the heart of complex issues asserting itself. Grace answered with the terrible clarity that came with her gift. "Because we're witnesses. Because we see things other people don't see, notice patterns that threaten powerful interests." She looked directly at Rashid. "The plane crash wasn't the first attempt on your life. There have been others. Smaller things that looked like accidents or coincidences." Rashid searched his memory, and details began falling into place with horrifying logic. The food poisoning at a Dubai conference that had kept him from signing a deal that would have threatened oil interests. The mechanical failure in his limousine that had been attributed to poor maintenance. The gas leak in his London hotel that had forced an evacuation hours before he was scheduled to arrive. "Someone's been trying to kill you for months," Grace continued, her young voice carrying weight that no child should bear. "But they needed it to look natural, accidental. The plane crash was supposed to be the perfect solution, a tragic accident that would also send a message to other foreign investors." Vincent's discovery of hard drives hidden behind the surveillance equipment revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Files containing detailed profiles, not just of Rashid's movements, but of everyone in the tunnel community who might have witnessed suspicious activities in the city above. "Look at this," Vincent said, opening files on a laptop he'd connected to the drives. "They've been tracking Grace specifically since she first started having visions that proved accurate. They know about her gift." The files revealed a chilling pattern. Grace's predictions had interfered with several criminal operations over the past months. Her warning about a school shooting that led to increased security, her tip about a building collapse that forced evacuation and revealed sabotage, her assistance to police in locating missing children who'd been trafficked. "They want her eliminated," Miguel said grimly, "because a child who can see the future is a threat to anyone planning crimes. But Rosa was studying different files, her expression growing increasingly angry. This isn't just about Grace or even Mr. Al-Hakim, she said. Look at these financial records. They're planning to clear the entire underground community, development contracts worth hundreds of millions, turning these tunnels into luxury shopping and entertainment complexes. The scope of the conspiracy became clear. Grace's gift had made her a threat to multiple powerful interests. Her ability to predict disasters threatened those who caused them. Her knowledge of the underground community threatened those who wanted to erase it for profit. And her rescue of Rashid had exposed their assassination plot to international scrutiny. We need to get this information to people who can act on it, Rashid said. But Miguel was shaking his head. Who's going to believe a bunch of homeless people and a billionaire who claims a psychic child saved his life? The veteran asked. The same system that put us down here will dismiss anything we say as desperate lies or mental illness. Grace, who had been quietly studying the surveillance monitors, suddenly pointed to one screen. They found us, she said with eerie calm. 6 men, military gear, coming through the water. They're not here to arrest anyone. The monitors showed figures in tactical equipment, moving through the flooded tunnels with deadly purpose. These weren't law enforcement officers following protocols. They were eliminating witnesses to a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of corporate and government power. There's another way out, Dorothy said quietly, her teacher's instincts focused on protecting the children. The old freight tunnel that connects to the river. It's narrow, but we could— No, Grace interrupted, her voice carrying an authority that seemed impossible from someone so young. Our running won't solve this. They'll keep hunting us, keep trying to silence anyone who threatens their plans. She looked around at the faces of the only family she'd ever really known. But I have an idea. It's dangerous, and it requires everyone trusting me completely, even when what I ask seems impossible. As the tactical team grew closer and the tunnel community faced its darkest hour, Grace revealed a plan that would either save them all or destroy everything they'd built together. The gift that had made her a target was about to become their salvation, if they had the courage to bet everything on the visions of an 8-year-old girl who saw truth in a world built on lies. Grace's plan was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. As the tactical team approached through the flooded passages, she calmly explained what needed to happen. We're going to broadcast everything, she said, her small hands working with Vincent's equipment with unsettling expertise. Every file, every surveillance record, every piece of evidence we've found, but not to the authorities. They're compromised. We're going to stream it live to the world. Vincent stared at her in amazement. Grace, that's actually brilliant. If we can get this information to enough people simultaneously, they can't suppress or discredit it. But how? Rosa asked, adjusting Marcus on her hip while keeping her voice low. We don't have the resources to reach. Social media, Dorothy interrupted, her teacher's understanding of technology surprising everyone. Live streaming platforms, viral hashtags, multiple channels broadcasting simultaneously. If we can create enough noise, the story becomes impossible to ignore. Miguel nodded grimly. Guerrilla information warfare, but we'll need time to upload everything, and those men out there aren't going to give us time. Grace's eyes took on that distant quality that came with her visions. They will, she said with certainty, because I'm going to give them what they think they want. Me. While they're focused on capturing me, you'll have the window you need to get the truth out. Absolutely not, Rashid said immediately. I won't let you sacrifice yourself. It's not sacrifice, Grace corrected him. It's strategy. I've seen what happens next, remember? But it only works if everyone plays their part exactly right. What followed was the most intense half-hour in any of their lives. While Vincent and Dorothy worked frantically to upload files and establish streaming connections, Grace positioned herself at the chamber's main entrance. Miguel and Rosa moved the children to the secondary exit, ready to evacuate if the plan failed. Rashid found himself in an impossible position, trusting the survival of everyone he'd come to care about to the visions of a child who'd already saved his life once but might not be able to save herself. The first stream is live, Vincent announced. Financial records showing the development conspiracy are broadcasting on 7 platforms simultaneously. Surveillance files are uploading to investigative journalism sites, Dorothy added, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards with the efficiency of someone who'd taught computer literacy for decades. Grace held up her hand for silence, listening to sounds only she could detect. "They're 60 seconds out," she said, with supernatural calm. "Vincent, are the assassination files ready?" "Ready," he confirmed, his hand hovering over the upload button. Grace turned to Rashid, and for a moment he saw not the preternaturally wise child who'd saved his life, but simply an 8-year-old girl who was scared but determined to protect the only family she'd ever known. "When they take me," she said quietly, "don't try to follow immediately. Wait until the uploads are complete. Then bring help. Real help, not the compromised authorities." "Grace, promise me," she insisted. "Promise you'll let me do this my way." Before Rashid could respond, tactical lights pierced the chamber's darkness. 6 figures in full combat gear entered with military precision, their weapons trained on the small group of civilians. "Stand down!" the team leader barked. "We're here for the girl and any evidence you've collected." Grace stepped forward, her hands visible and empty. "I'm Grace Martinez," she said clearly, her voice echoing in the concrete chamber. "I'm the one who predicted the airplane crash. Are you here to kill me like you tried to kill Mr. Al-Hakim?" The team leader's hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was enough for Vincent to hit the final upload button. Across the internet, files began flooding social media platforms, news outlets, and government transparency sites. The conspiracy that had operated in shadows was suddenly exposed to global sunlight. "Sir," one of the tactical officers said, pressing his earpiece, "we have a problem. The story is already trending worldwide. Tunnel truth, billionaire believes. Save Grace. Millions of views in the first 5 minutes." Grace smiled with satisfaction that seemed impossible for someone her age. "Funny thing about the truth," she said. "Once it starts spreading, it's really hard to stop." The team leader made a decision that revealed everything about who they really worked for. Instead of following proper arrest procedures, he reached for Grace with the clear intention of making her disappear forever. But Miguel had been waiting for exactly that moment. The veteran's military training kicked in as he launched himself from his wheelchair, tackling the team leader and creating the chaos needed for everyone else to reach the emergency exit. "Go!" he shouted as the chamber erupted in confusion. "Get Grace out of here!" Rosa grabbed Grace's hand, while Dorothy guided the children toward the tunnel exit. Rashid found himself running through underground passages he'd never imagined existed, carrying Marcus while armed men pursued them through the darkness. Behind them, Vicente's voice echoed from the surveillance chamber. "Upload complete. Everything's live." The chase through Chicago's underground became a nightmare of twisting passages and dead ends, but Grace's supernatural knowledge of the tunnel system gave them advantages their pursuers couldn't match. She led them through spaces too narrow for fully equipped tactical officers, around flooded areas that would slow down pursuit, and finally to an exit that emerged in Grant Park, where the morning sun felt like salvation after hours in artificial light. Rashid's phone immediately began buzzing with calls from media outlets worldwide. The hashtags Vincent had mentioned were indeed trending globally, with millions of people sharing surveillance footage, financial documents, and the story of a billionaire who'd believed a homeless child's prophecy. But their victory was temporary. Grace collapsed the moment they reached surface, her small body finally succumbing to exhaustion and stress. As Rosa checked her vitals with growing concern, Rashid realized that saving the truth might have cost them the person who'd made it all possible. "She's going into shock," Rosa announced grimly. "We need medical attention, real medical attention, and we need it now." As ambulances screamed toward Grant Park and news helicopters circled overhead, Rashid held Grace's unconscious form and prayed that her final vision had shown them all surviving this moment, because the world was finally listening. But the little girl who'd made them listen might have sacrificed everything to ensure her voice was heard. The transformation she'd prophesied was beginning, but its cost was becoming terrifyingly clear. The emergency room at Northwestern Memorial Hospital became ground zero for a media frenzy. Unlike anything Chicago had ever witnessed, Grace lay unconscious in the pediatric ICU, while outside, protesters, journalists, and government officials created a circus that threatened to overshadow the very cause she'd nearly died to expose. Rashid hadn't left her bedside in 18 hours, despite pressure from FBI agents who wanted to debrief him and lawyers who insisted he distance himself from what they called a public relations nightmare. Through the window, he could see crowds holding signs, "Believe Grace," "Save Our Underground," and "Truth Over Power." Dr. Sarah Kim, the attending pediatrician, pulled him aside with an expression of professional concern mixed with something approaching awe. "Mr. Al-Hakim, Grace is stable, but we need to discuss her condition. The exhaustion is severe, but there's something else, neurological activity that's unusual." "What do you mean?" "Her brain scans show patterns consistent with someone in a deep meditative state, but her neural activity is off the charts. It's as if she's processing enormous amounts of information while unconscious." Dr. Kim paused. "Has she mentioned any experiences during her visions?" Before Rashid could answer, Detective Chen appeared in the doorway with news that changed everything. "Mr. Al-Hakim, we've arrested 6 individuals connected to the surveillance operation. The evidence Grace helped expose has triggered federal investigations into defense contractors, real estate developers, and 2 sitting senators." But Chen's expression remained grim. "The problem is, the people behind this are powerful enough to weather the storm. Without Grace's testimony from someone they're already painting as a mentally unstable child, the main players might escape consequences." That afternoon brought a delegation that surprised everyone. Miguel, Vincent, Dorothy, and Rosa emerged from elevators accompanied by federal marshals and civil rights lawyers. The underground community had surrendered themselves to authorities not as criminals, but as witnesses and victims demanding justice. "So we're done hiding," Miguel announced, his wheelchair pushed close to Grace's bedside. "That little girl risked everything to give us a voice. Now we use it." What happened next was unprecedented in American legal history. The tunnel community, supported by a legal team funded by Rashid's foundation, filed a class-action lawsuit that challenged fundamental assumptions about homelessness, government surveillance, and corporate power. Their case was simple. They were American citizens whose constitutional rights had been violated by a conspiracy to silence and eliminate them for corporate profit. Vincent had recovered additional evidence from the surveillance station, recordings of conversations between government officials and private contractors discussing population management and urban cleansing. The audio files, released through WikiLeaks and major news outlets, sparked outrage that crossed political lines. But the real breakthrough came when Grace finally woke up. "I saw the rest of it," she whispered, her voice hoarse but determined. "While I was unconscious, I saw everything, all the connections, all the people involved, and how this ends." Dr. Kim checked her vitals with amazement. "Grace, you've been unconscious for 36 hours. How do you feel?" "Different," Grace said honestly. "I'd like the visions are clearer now, more controlled. I think almost dying changed something." She turned to Rashid with eyes that held new depth. "The plane crash was just the beginning. There's a whole network of people who profit from keeping others invisible, from homelessness, from immigration crises, from veterans' problems. They create the conditions that force people underground. Then they profit from both the problems and the solutions. Over the next hour, Grace provided details that would fuel investigations for years. Names of officials who diverted funding from social services to private prisons. Companies that deliberately created housing shortages to drive up property values. Politicians who voted against mental health programs while investing in private security firms hired to manage the resulting homeless populations. "The beautiful thing," Grace said, with a smile that transformed her entire face, "is that exposing them doesn't require my visions anymore. Once you know what to look for, the evidence is everywhere." The climax came during a live televised congressional hearing where Grace, despite her youth, testified before the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. Millions of Americans watched as this 8-year-old girl calmly detailed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and corporate power. "The people who tried to kill Mr. Al-Hakim and silence our community believed that some voices don't matter," Grace said, her clear voice carrying through the marble halls of Congress. "They believed that homeless people, children, immigrants, and veterans are disposable. But we're not disposable. We're Americans, and we deserve the same protection, the same opportunities, and the same respect as everyone else." When Senator Patricia Caldwell, one of the officials named in the surveillance files, tried to discredit Grace's testimony by questioning her mental state, the response was immediate and devastating. Miguel, testifying next, removed his prosthetic legs and placed them on the witness table. "Senator, I lost these legs fighting for the flag behind you. This child saved a man's life, and exposed a conspiracy that threatens everything that flag represents. If you want to question someone's mental state, so look in a mirror. The hearing room erupted in applause that lasted 5 full minutes. By evening, Senator Caldwell had announced her resignation, 2 defense contractors had been indicted, and Congress had passed emergency funding for homeless services nationwide, legislation they called Grace's Law. But the real transformation was just beginning. 6 months later, Rashid stood in the lobby of what had once been abandoned tunnels beneath Chicago, now transformed into the Grace Martinez Center for Urban Innovation. The space buzzed with activity, formerly homeless veterans teaching job skills to at-risk youth, Rosa running a community health clinic, Dorothy overseeing educational programs that had become a model for urban schools nationwide. Grace herself had changed as much as the space around her. No longer the frightened child living in shadows, she carried herself with quiet confidence as she moved between different programs, her gift now channeled into helping others rather than mere survival. The visions continued, but they came with purpose, preventing accidents, locating missing persons, and identifying opportunities for positive change before crises developed. The Congressional Committee wants another hearing next month, Rashid told her as they walked past Vincent's workshop, where the veteran was teaching mechanical skills to teenagers who might otherwise have ended up on the streets. Senator Williams thinks your testimony could help pass the Comprehensive Homelessness Reform Bill. Grace nodded thoughtfully. I saw that coming weeks ago, but there's something else, something bigger that's going to happen first. She paused by a window that looked out onto Michigan Avenue, where the center's success had begun transforming the entire neighborhood. Do you remember what I told you about seeing what comes after? About how saving you was just the beginning? Rashid had learned to take Grace's predictions seriously, even when they seemed impossible. What do you see? A movement, she said simply. Not just here in Chicago, but everywhere. People are waking up to the fact that homelessness isn't a personal failure, it's a system failure. And once enough people understand that, everything changes. She was right, as usual. The Grace Martinez Center had inspired similar programs in 12 cities. Miguel had been appointed to a federal task force on veteran services. Rosa's community health model was being replicated nationwide. Dorothy's educational programs had proven that homeless children could excel academically when given proper support. But perhaps most importantly, Grace herself had become a symbol of society's capacity for transformation. Her story had challenged fundamental assumptions about whose voices mattered, whose experiences were valid, and whose lives had value. There's one more thing, Grace said, her tone shifting to the careful seriousness that indicated an important vision. Next Tuesday, at 3:17 p.m., you're going to get a phone call that changes everything again. Rashid smiled. Can you give me a hint about what kind of call? Grace's answering smile was radiant, the kind that proves saving one person really can save the world. The president wants to meet us, not for a photo opportunity, but because Congress is ready to pass the National Housing Security Act. They want our input on implementation. The call came exactly when Grace had predicted, and the meeting that followed led to the most comprehensive anti-poverty legislation in American history. But for Rashid, the real victory was smaller and more personal. Watching Marcus, who had finally begun speaking regularly, read a story aloud to a circle of younger children. Seeing Rosa receive her medical license reinstatement and open a practice that served both the housed and unhoused with equal dignity. Witnessing Miguel's transformation from underground survivor to nationally recognized advocate. As for Grace, she had chosen to remain in Chicago, living with Rashid in a legal guardianship arrangement that had required congressional intervention to navigate immigration and custody laws. She continued her education while also serving as an advisor to social service programs nationwide, the only 8-year-old consultant in federal government history. Do you ever regret it? Rashid asked her one evening as they walked through Grant Park, where a memorial now honored the homeless individuals who had died on Chicago's streets before the center's programs could reach them. Giving up your anonymity, dealing with all the attention and pressure. Grace considered the question with the thoughtfulness that made her seem far older than her years. I used to think my gift was a curse because it made me different, made me alone. But I understand now that being different isn't the curse. Wasting your differences is the curse. She pointed to the skyline where construction cranes marked new affordable housing projects funded through the legislation her testimony had helped pass. Every person who doesn't have to sleep outside tonight, every child who doesn't have to age out of foster care into homelessness, every veteran who gets the mental health care they earned. That's why I was given these visions. Not to predict disaster, but to prevent it. The transformation Grace had foreseen was indeed spreading far beyond Chicago. Cities across America were implementing programs based on the principle that housed people cost less than homeless people, that treatment was more effective than punishment, and that listening to the voices of the affected was the first step toward real solutions. But perhaps the most important change was cultural. Grace's story had humanized homelessness in a way that statistics never could, proving that genius and wisdom could emerge from the most unlikely places, and that salvation often came from those society had written off as lost. If Grace's story has moved you, remember that real children are living in similar circumstances right now, in tunnels, under bridges, and in places society prefers not to see. Their voices matter. Their experiences are valid. Their potential is unlimited if we choose to listen. Visit your local homeless services organization, volunteer at youth shelters, support legislation that treats housing as a human right rather than a privilege. And most importantly, when you encounter someone society has labeled as disposable, remember Grace's words. We're not disposable. We're Americans. And we deserve the same protection, the same opportunities, and the same respect as everyone else. Sometimes the person you save might be the one who saves the world. Sometimes the voice crying out in the darkness carries the wisdom we all need to hear. And sometimes the most important prophecy is the one that reminds us we all have the power to choose a different future. The question isn't whether you have a gift like Grace's. The question is whether you have the courage to use whatever gifts you do have to lift up those who need lifting, to listen to voices that need hearing, and to believe that transformation is always possible when we choose to see each other's humanity. Grace Martinez saw the future, and in that future no one has to be invisible anymore.